and welcome back to my channel. This is Aadi. Today I'm here to talk about a war that was fought between India and China in the year of 1967. A lot has been said about the standoff between both the countries in Ladakh. People do forget the times when the Indian army gave the Chinese a bloody nose. So stay tuned and find out how this battle ensued. Before I continue to the story, I'd like to request you to like and subscribe to my channel, share my videos with your friends, and thank you for watching. Here is the story. Now, after the war in 1962, the Chinese had thought that the Indian army could be walked over any time. This was a time when the Indian army was asked to fight a battle with one hand tied behind its back due to disastrous political decisions as well as the lack of the use of the Indian Air Force. The Indian Armed Forces suffered quite badly during this battle, post which a huge amount of work was done to lift up the Indian Armed Forces and make it battle ready. During the war of 1965 against another very friendly neighbor of ours, Pakistan, the Chinese tried to intrude into two sectors in the northeastern region of the country. The two sectors were the passes of the Nathu La as well as Cho. These two are very strategic passes which were in the state of Sikkim, that time a protectorate of the Indian Army. Remember, Sikkim became a state of the Indian Union only in 1975. The Chinese never liked the fact that Sikkim was a protectorate of the Indian Army, the same way they don't like the fact that Bhutan is also a protectorate of the Indian Army today. So during the 1965 war, the Chinese thought that the Indians were totally occupied with the war on the Western Front and would not pay much heed on towards this side. Asked the Indian Army to vacate these two passes, which was of course blatantly refused. The Chinese resorted to tactics of salami slicing. They attempted incursions right on from the month of June and July. The tensions between both the forces lasted on far beyond the battle between the Indian Army and the Pakistani Army in 1965. The tensions went on till 1967. Now, on the 13th of June 1967, China expelled two Indian diplomats in Peking, which is today Beijing, accusing them of espionage. These two were K. Raghunath as well as P. Vijay, who were part of the Indian Foreign Service. What had happened was these two had got embroiled in a bizarre alleged spying conspiracy spun out by the Chinese. These two were caught taking a photograph of what appeared to be a Chinese prohibited area, which was actually a temple of a sleeping Buddha. The Chinese accused them of taking photographs and spying on sensitive areas of their country. As a matter of fact, the Chinese caught these two, put them on a public trial, made films for propaganda to sell to their own public. One of them was known as severely punished the Indian spy Raghunath. They further locked up the Indian embassy in Peking and kept the staff captive inside the embassy. Well, the Indian side responded in kind, did the same thing with the Chinese embassy in New Delhi. These restrictions on both the parties were lifted in about 15 to 20 days by the 3rd of July. But by then, the relations between both the countries had gone sour and there were tensions which were close to what the tensions that we can see today. Now, due to the salami slicing tactics of the Chinese, where they would intrude a little bit, come back a little bit, intrude a little bit, come back a little bit, the Indian Army decided to put an end to it by putting a barbed wire fence on the borderline close to the pass of Nathu La as well as Cho. These are strategic passes in that area between both the regions where traditionally a lot of trade used to take place in the earlier times. Of course, when the Indian Army started to do this, the Chinese evidently disagreed with this. The PLA, as a matter of fact, put loudspeakers in that area, threatening the Indian Army that they would face the similar consequence as they faced in 1962. The Indian Army, undeterred and knowing its will to fight as well as its preparedness, went ahead and did what they needed to do. The work on this fence started somewhere around on the 20th of August. The Chinese troops would come close to the area, fist fights would ensue, stone pelting would happen, a lot of abusing, hurling and stuff would take place, but things would normally regularize by the evening and the work of the Indian Army continued till the early part of September. Another incident that happened on the 7th of September when the Indian Army was doing the work at the border 100 of the Chinese soldiers, fully armed, came rushing towards the Indian side, ultimately leading to another scuffle. The Chinese resorted to stone pelting. Of course, a tough answer was given back by the troops of the Indian army. On the 10th of September, the Chinese sent an ultimatum to the Indian embassy. It went on further to state that the Indian armed forces and the Indian community shall be held responsible for any consequence that takes place due to a border dispute between both the countries. On and around the time of 11th of September, Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora, who was the corps commander in the region, directed the Indian armed forces to finish the work of the border, notwithstanding what the Chinese have to say. This work was given to the 70th Field Company of Engineers, assisted by a company of 18th Rajput deployed on both the passes. On the fateful day of 11th of September, when the Indian Army went in to start their work, a political commissar of the People's Liberation Army, along with a huge number of Chinese troops, came close to the border and started arguing and pushing around the Indian troops. During the time when the Chinese rushed up to the border, the Indian commander of that area, Lieutenant Colonel Rai Singh, rushed up to that place, and which led to an argument between the political commissar who was attached to the unit of the People's Liberation Army. During this scuffle, Colonel Rai Singh was very aggressive with this political commissar, which led to a point where the spectacles of this political commissar was thrown to the ground and smashed. What happened after this is the point where the battle starts. The Chinese ran back to their bunkers. They opened murderous medium machine gun fire in the passes of Nathula, of which one of the first casualties was the commander of that area, Lieutenant Colonel Rai Singh. He, even then at an injured state, directed his troops to take cover and return fire, and was awarded a Mahavir Chakra for his efforts. Two other brave officers, Captain Dagar of the 2nd Grenadiers and Major Harbhajan of the 18th Rajput, rallied what few of the troops that were there and took on the Chinese medium machine gun fire. These both were overpowered by the Chinese. Even knowing that, these two went into battle and gave the Chinese a bloody nose. They, as a matter of fact, assaulted the positions where the Chinese medium machine guns were there and took over some of the positions, as well as capturing some of the weapons. Both these died a heroic death in the battle and were awarded gallantry awards for their brave efforts. Within first 10 to 15 minutes, the Indian Army had lost 70 of its brave soldiers who were lying wounded or dead in that particular pass. By this time, the Indian Army came into its being and started responding with heavy artillery shelling over the PLA posts, literally destroying everything right down to the ground. Bolstered by this fierce close quarter combat, the mountaineers and the grenadiers counter-attacked the Chinese positions and pushed them back. By the 12th of September, the Indian Armed Forces, reinforced in that area, took charge of certain strategic heights, showing the Chinese that we could take on whatever they had to throw at us. As a matter of fact, the Chinese got so scared of the swift Indian response, they started threatening bringing in warplanes for an air raid in this particular area. After the fact that the Indian Armed Forces went up and took strategic heights, as again was done this time in the border standoff at Ladakh, the proposal of ceasefire came across from the Chinese on the 13th of September at about 5:30 p.m. in the evening. It was cleanly rejected by the Indian Armed Forces, but the Indian Armed Forces were also told not to take any aggressive action. An uneasy peace was spread across the border by the 14th of September. On the 15th of September, the dead bodies which were lying between both the armies in each other's area were exchanged in the presence of Sam Manekshaw, who was the Eastern Army commander, as well as Jagjit Singh Arora, who was the Corps Commander 17th Mountain Division. But of course, there was still trouble ahead for those who thought this battle was over. On the 1st of October 1967, a Chinese platoon got into a heated argument with a forward platoon commander, Naik Subedar Gyan Bahadur Limbu, over the ownership of a small stone demarcating the boundary at the area of Chola. Now this is the second part of the battle. This is another important pass in the area of Sikkim. This battle got heated up and lasted for about 10 days, resulting in huge amount of casualties on the Chinese side. There were some inspiring stories that came across from this battle. and I'd like to take a couple of minutes to actually tell them to you. Now, during this argument between the platoon commander of the People's Liberation Army as well as Naib Subedar Gyan Bahadur Limbu had put his foot on that stone demarcating the line. He was pushed back by the Chinese platoon commander, and as a matter of fact, it is quite evident that the Chinese had come there looking for trouble. During this scuffle, Naib Subedar was bayoneted by one of the Chinese. Now, Naib Subedar, being a Gorkha, took out his kukri and went after the Chinese and literally cut both the arms of the Chinese who had attacked him. Subedar Gyan Bahadur Limbu as well as his post commander Lance Nayak Krishna Bahadur led a charge against the Chinese, who by that time ran back into their bunkers and opened murderous fires on these guys. Another rifleman, Devi Prasad Limbu, who went directly behind his post commander during this attack, charged at the Chinese when his ammunition was over and took with him 5 Chinese heads before he attained martyrdom. Rifleman was honored with a Veer Chakra for his efforts. This battle, as I said, lasted for the next 10 days, and the Gorkhas' fierce action with their guns and their kukris pushed the Chinese back, scared, back into their pits. In this 10 days of fierce battle that was fought between both the armies at Chola as well as the days of battle that was fought at Nathula, in a way drove away the ghosts of the battle in 1962, where the Chinese had given the Indian army a very tough time. As a matter of fact, till date, both the passes are firmly in the Indian control, as well as the state of Sikkim, which came into Indian control in 1975, of course due to the efforts of the Research and Analysis Wing as well as the Indian Army. I have made a video about the contribution of the RAW, which you can find in a playlist in my channel. Do watch that. The story of Nathula is never complete without mentioning Baba Harbhajan Singh, a soldier of the 23rd Battalion Punjab Regiment. He was a mule driver. Mule drivers are soldiers that would take mules loaded with supplies that were required for the forward posts in very treacherous conditions. Somewhere in 1968, Baba Harbhajan Singh slipped and drowned into a stream while doing his duties. A search party of the Indian Army was put together, and after 3 or 4 days of search, they could not find anything. Legend has it, the soldiers in the search party actually got Baba Harbhajan Singh in a dream, telling them where his body was. And as a matter of fact, the next day when the search party went across over there, they found the body of Baba Harbhajan Singh. He was cremated with full military honors. Army folklore has it that Singh has appeared in his fellow colleagues' dreams even to this day, warning them of aggressive Chinese action in that area, along with the fact that there is a memorial or a small temple built in his honor in that area. Both militaries and civilians throng to this shrine to pay their respects to Baba Harbhajan Singh. There is also a story wherein the Indian Army actually books a seat in a train which goes from the eastern part to his hometown in Kapurthala with his entire luggage every year, because Baba Harbhajan Singh goes back to his village on annual leave. Now, both the battles between Nathula as well as Chola, the Indian side lost about 88 killed and about 163 wounded in action, whereas the Chinese lost about 340 soldiers as well as 450 wounded in this battle. This is a clear reminder to the hard, bloody nose that the Indian Army can give the PLA, considering worse comes to worse. This was again showcased by the brave soldiers of the 16 Bihar in the incident that took place in the Galwan Valley, led by Colonel Santosh Babu. On the 1st of October every year, the Indian Army celebrates something called the Chola Day in remembrance of the soldiers who laid down their lives protecting these two passes. It is these two battles that were fought and another skirmish that happened in 1987 that keeps the Chinese away from the eastern part of this country. Even today, they threaten, but they do not come across, because they know and they remember the bloody response that was given by the Indian Army. Sikkim became a part of the Indian Union in 1975 after a referendum conducted under the eyes of the RAW and Indian Army. The story of these two battles were kept hidden from the general public of India for reasons unknown even today. I believe that these are instances when the Indian Army taught the Chinese a lesson, a very, very hard lesson that the Chinese will never forget. One thing that I'd like to tell the Chinaman is stop ratcheting up the 1962, remember 1967, and as well as the fact that this Indian Army, the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy is not the one of 1960s. Even though right now the Chinese have accepted to go back to their positions at Finger 8 in Pangong So, I would still urge the commanders of the Indian Army not to take the Chinese at their face value. They are treacherous and deceitful. This business of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai has to be Hindi Chini Bye Bye, as was mentioned jokingly by a lot of people. So here is the story that I wanted to share with you of our brave soldiers defending every inch of our motherland. There are a lot many more, and I'll be coming back with more and more. So subscribe to my channel, share my videos with your friends, and of course, yes, share a thought for our soldiers standing in the battle lines, in the land, in the sea and in the air. Once a day, every day. Jai Hind.